I'm Garrett McQueen.
I'm Scott Blankenship.
And this is Trilloquy, true and real stories from the fringes of classical music. Scott, I have to tell you, I'm feeling, I can't say I'm feeling good. I can't say I'm feeling bad. I'm feeling now that this, we're really into this podcast and it's off the ground. I've already gotten some really great feedback. It's really something. It just makes me feel like there's so much more work to do. That's how I feel right now.
I have to tell you that I'm getting feedback too. As soon as we were getting ready to post the first Opus, one of the guys that works in digital, Seiji, comes over and says, "Hey, nobody's doing anything like this. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for doing this." And then just last night, a friend of mine, next door neighbor in Omaha, reached out of the blue through Facebook, and he said, "I am totally on board. Everything that you've got out so far, I've listened to." And basically what we got down to is he admitted that ever since Black Lives Matter and Me Too have become prevalent, he's having realizations, bombs are going off for him.
Yeah.
And so he's on a path now to fix it or, do something to remedy that.
I'm sure, and I'm sure that you share some of those moments of realizations. We were talking before we cut on the mics. There was an audience segment that I had in mind when I was coming up with the idea for this, and it looks like there's an audience segment that relates more to you that's out there that I hadn't really thought about either. Folks that. I won't speak for you or for them. How would you describe the Scott Hive, the team Scott, as far as the Trilloquy listening audience?
They look like me, right? Okay, so they're white, they're middle-aged, and I think that anybody who's paying attention and really cares is probably doing some house cleaning and having some realizations. And I think that some of them are probably embarrassed to come forward and say, I was complicit just by standing by, or, casual racism, the bias,
unconscious bias.
All these things are happening and they're having the realizations, so it's a good thing.
I had my own realizations as well. I remember there was a day in particular when hashtag Me Too really went off on the internet.
Yeah.
And going up and down my timeline on Twitter and Facebook, and seeing all these women that I know recount their stories of sexual abuse and sexual assault.
Yeah.
Man, it just really broke my heart thinking about how so many women I know have had to deal with this, and how, I guess my reaction is abuse by men an intrinsic part of being a woman? I mean, that's what it felt like. And I felt so horrible for not really having a vision of it. I've never been involved romantically, sexually, or otherwise with a woman in my life. So, that dynamic is not one that I really know or understand or have any experience with. And seeing it, through these, seeing the stories told through all these women that I know was really something else for me. That's why all these conversations are really important. So I'm glad people are listening to this and relating to you, Scott,
it's
about
positive.
About growth and transition and just willingness to listen.
Yeah, I'm encouraged by it. So let's keep doing it.
Yeah, and we've also been putting in some time away from work as well. You invited Dell and I to brunch, and I didn't know it was going to be an all-day thing.
Neither did I, but it ended up that way.
But it's fun. I had a good time. I'm always, I think we're approaching that era of our friendship when there are certain, certain unspoken things that just don't matter anymore. Because I'm often concerned with imposing on people's time because I know how much time I don't have, and so when there are people that like come over to hang out with me, there's always that, okay, how am I gonna push him out the door? How am I gonna politely say that it's time for you to leave? But I guess you just had a lot of time to share with us.
I felt like at some point I should have asked, do you guys need to be somewhere?
I mean,
did you have
obviously we
something
didn't.
Did you have something going on? Because normally, it would have been me and Radar.
And normally it would just been me and Dell. And I beat the concrete so hard all week. On Sundays we just like I was telling you, that's our day to
I felt
go
like
to the museum.
yeah.
Or we go to the Mall of America a lot, really just to walk around. But
I was hoping that I wasn't stepping on, because you mentioned that is your time to be together and to have your time, and I didn't want to be stepping on that. So
no.
that's what I was being
No, not
trying
at
to
all.
be considerate of.
Had a great time. Showed me Phelan Park.
Lake Phelan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see that
the
place
fall.
in the winter. I want to see Lake Phelan frozen. I've never walked on frozen ice, and the idea still makes me really nervous.
Yeah, I'm not doing that anymore.
Because
I thought I almost went through.
oh my goodness.
Yeah, we had a warm stretch in right around Valentine's Day one particular year. I took Radar out for a walk late, and I just happened to go through with one leg through an ice fishing hole that hadn't completely frozen over. I thought I was a goner.
Oh my gosh.
But thankfully, I didn't go all the way through.
Maybe I won't be walking out on Lake Phelan this winter.
I'm telling you, it just takes one time.
The edge. I'll just to say that I did it. But we did all that. Had a couple nice meals. You're a pretty decent cook.
I appreciate that.
And of course, you have to leave the cocktails up to me.
That was a good call too.
And toward the end of the night, one of the things we really like to do is, just kind of listen to music or just watch random videos and all that sort of thing. And we kind of, talking about the Read podcast, shout out to Kid Fury and Crystal. I brought her up for some reason, and so we watched the episode of Drunk History she did, talking about Harriet Tubman.
Yeah.
And the next day I found myself giving that another shout out on Twitter. Because, when we talk about like the veterans and military history in the United States, we don't talk about Harriet Tubman as the first woman to what did she say, to lead to lead a war. I don't know my military words, Scott. Like to lead not a battle, but a plan, to execute a plan. Somebody listening knows exactly what I mean. I feel bad.
She had a mission. She had a
yeah. She was the first American woman to lead a military mission, I guess, and it's just a bit of that American history that we don't talk about enough, and it was really something. And in the pain, as we were leaving your place, this is like 1 a.m. on the pain for Play Next was the Drunk History episode about the Little Rock Nine. And you knew the story and you knew that history, but I guess you just didn't know it as the Little Rock Nine, or know them as the Little Rock Nine.
Right. I mean, I knew that it was about integration in the schools,
Yeah.
and the National Guard was involved. I just didn't know that there was a name for that day.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
those people involved.
Well, of course, so growing up in Memphis, Little Rock is, I mean, I think it's about 2 hours away. Like it's not a long drive. We would go hang out in Little Rock all the time. So that history and that present is one that I was very much aware of. I've visited, I didn't go there obviously as a student, but I've visited the grounds, and it's one thing to see the pictures in the textbooks or on the internet, but then to be there and to see this space and think about these children, and that's something that we don't think about a lot either. Like, these were kids.
They were in their teens, right?
These are teenagers having to deal with violent adults, trying to keep them out of this school. And I think about those adults and I think about their kids, and I think about their kids, who are here, probably, I mean, probably younger than me or my age at this point. What is their relationship with their history, with
Mm-hmm.
their family history, and their family present? And it got me on this. It was emotional for me because I am very much familiar with. Again, I'm familiar with that story, but just thinking about how not so long ago that was, how these people are alive and living. And Scott, I remember some episodes ago you said, well, maybe you have more allies than you think.
Mm-hmm.
And thinking about those stories and that bit of history just make me feel like I don't, because if your grandparents, or God forbid your parents, were one of the people out there screaming and yelling and holding the picket signs and throwing out the N word and just making life for these teenagers just
So
horrible,
embarrassed.
and they were just trying to go to school. How can am I supposed to just assume that people are on my side when I'm walking down the street? Am I just to assume that all of a sudden somebody flipped a light switch or snapped their fingers, and everyone in your family, your generation is the non-racist generation, your generation is the non-bigoted generation? Does that make sense?
It does.
That's just kind of the mindset I have to think of and live in so often.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from, and talking with you about it and watching that video, even though the video was taking sort of a humorous, there were elements of humor in a story that is not funny.
Right.
Do you find that to be a problem, that there was a humorous bent on a story that was
And this
traumatic?
Right. And this is why diversity is important, because at the head, telling this story, reenacting this story, and really pushing it forward were black people.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like I'm watching, it would feel very different if I was watching someone who looked like you sitting on a couch half drunk telling this story, rather than a black woman who has lived that experience, and we can take that sort of thing in jest. I was watching the Breakfast Club on YouTube not too long ago, maybe a few weeks ago, and there was a young playwright on there. And he told this story about how his grandfather was almost lynched, like survived a lynching. And he takes his time telling this, horrid story. And he ends by saying, now, of course, when my grandfather used to tell us this story, it was hilarious, and we would all be laughing. And, because there's certain things that you learn to... they have the phrase, laugh to keep from crying.
Sure.
And there's certain things that black folk and other folks of color, women perhaps, I can't speak for women, but, of these situations, we just know how to take them and turn them into something, that can teach us and enrich us. Every time I go home and visit my parents, we all have a new story of racism in our lives. And, just the way it's told is funny. If I go into the gas station on my way home today and someone in there calls me the N-word, I'm going to go home and talk to Dell, and I'm going to be like, this person wearing such and such and blah, 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 just, and maybe, I don't know, and maybe there's more to that conversation about how we, are kind of forced to cope in that way. And it's just so real. And it makes me think about the concept of freedom. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So this isn't an opus officially. This is our first, we're going to call this an intermezzo. So
for people who aren't hip to classical music terminology or music terminology, an intermezzo is...
So I define an intermezzo as sort of an in-between piece. So imagine going to an opera, and you have these different acts. Operas are in acts. Between each act, would be, back in the day especially, would be a musical performance of some sort on stage, just to keep the audience entertained or, whatever.
While they change costumes and get
Yeah.
the set ready and all
Yeah.
that.
So that's
Okay.
called an intermezzo. That's what that music was called.
Okay.
So that's what we're calling this.
In today's pop music, you might call it a bridge.
Sure. I mean, well, similar.
Okay.
Right. So the concept is the same, but it's its own separate piece of music. That's the thing. So this is an intermezzo on freedom, specifically Juneteenth, and I'm going to say that word freedom a lot. And we've had this conversation as well, Scott, because are we free? What is freedom? Watching that Little Rock 9 special made me just think about how much I want to no longer be under the thumb of systemic white oppression. And it's a shame that I almost feel a guilt about saying that into this microphone, but I want to live in a world where I can just be me. I want to live in a world where I don't have to let respectability politics rule over what I say or what I wear or where I go. Dell wants to go to a hockey game, and I'm nervous about that. I don't know what that environment is like. I don't see too many black people playing hockey, so I imagine I wouldn't see too many black people in the crowd. So am I gonna have to deal with some BS in there? It's all of these metaphorical chains that just hold us down, and we're not free. We can't go where we want to go. We can't do what we want to do. Anyway, we'll get into that more, but
yeah, we gotta let's keep on our little roadmap here.
Yeah, I told you I was feeling today. I'm very emotional.
I'm trying to be there with you.
How are we gonna do this? So I guess yesterday was Juneteenth. Do you know anything about Juneteenth? In general, just very generally speaking.
I don't remember anything from grade school. In fact, the only memory that I have of it actually being covered in class would have been freshman year of college, Black Studies.
Yeah. Oh,
And
you took
even-
Black Studies in college?
Yeah.
Oh, good for you.
And even still, I couldn't give you names or particulars. I'm only aware of it. I don't remember the particulars.
Well, I'm just gonna read. So for C24, I did a for Juneteenth.
Classical 24 is the team that we work for.
Right. So over the radio all day for Juneteenth, one piece each hour was by a Black American, and it was preceded by some sort of story or something that can tie them with Juneteenth. So I'm just going to read a bit of that script, and that'll just lay down what Juneteenth is. The Emancipation Proclamation is widely remembered as the beginning of freedom for American slaves, but all weren't actually freed until over 2 years after President Lincoln gave that speech. It was June 19th, 1865, when Major General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston, Texas, with news that the Civil War had officially ended. With that news came a demand that all former slaves must be freed. Since then, June 19th has been known as Juneteenth, a holiday that celebrates the freedom of Afro-Americans from slavery, the vibrant and rich culture of today's Black communities, and the continued push for true racial equality and equity. Down south, not in Memphis where I'm from, but I know I have a homie that lives in Paducah, Kentucky. Juneteenth is like a bank holiday there. Like stores are closed and everyone is grilling out and cooking and that's just kind of what that holiday has been about. And in recent years especially, it's really been significant when we talk about Independence Day. So what did I just say? June 19th of 1865, when the slaves were freed. America had been a country. It had been a long time since July 4th, 1776. What did Black people have to celebrate on that day or the year after or the decade after? So July 4th is what it is. But for me, I always look to Juneteenth as the day when I get to celebrate the idea of freedom, even though it's not completely here yet, not from my perspective. And you said, other than Black studies in undergraduate where it may have been mentioned, but this wasn't just a core part of your like middle school or high school education,
No,
right? Why do you think that is?
I'm uncertain. As I look back, I also have memories of wondering if these books that we were given were even accurate.
Listen, and we're talking about Texas. Not too long ago, we were talking about this at your place.
Yeah. They started changing wording that slaves were not being referred to as slaves anymore, but rather workers. They brought workers over to be on, to work in the fields or something, and that makes it feel as if they were on board with it, like they were ready to go.
It's that very dangerous narrative of the happy slave or the good slave owner. The idea that anything good, any modicum of goodness could be found in that dark, violent American history. And I define that as violent to change that textbook, to change the narratives around what all of this was. And you say you don't know why necessarily it wasn't a core part of your primary education. I know exactly why, because once again, these are conversations, and this is a history that we're expected to forget. I think about World War II and Nazi Germany all the time.
Mm-hmm.
They had to pay for what they did in a big way.
Yeah.
They really had to pay for that. And the United States has not had to do that yet. There has not been a come to terms, a come I won't say come to Jesus, but a come to truth about what all of that was and what we need to do about it today.
A full realization and taking responsibility and accepting the fact that happened.
I'm glad you said that. Take responsibility, because that is an area that just stumps a lot of people. So, Scott, you obviously were not a slave owner,
Well,
right?
early on when we first started doing these podcasts, I said I still make mistakes.
Yeah.
And when you asked me if I was an ally, I said I'm trying.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
I'm admitting that I'm still on the path.
Right. I mean, and that's the point. We're all on a different path. We're all on our paths. But what I was going to say is, you are not. You were not a slave owner. You never had the whip in your hand. But there are certain benefits that you have enjoyed in your life that are connected to that culture,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what I always mean about taking responsibility. In the same way that as men, both of us have had have had benefits due to the toxic patriarchy or whatever. It's about acknowledging those power structures. I feel like I say that phrase a lot on this podcast.
Power structures?
Acknowledging the power structures.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess we're gonna tie this to classical music at some point. But it's a conversation that I think classical music needs to have, as well as the scientists, as well as because there's whatever,
Mm-hmm.
because it all connects, and it's all a part of our history that we need to acknowledge. I mean, speaking about Nazi Germany again, there's a lot of music that we talk about that has a relationship with that culture, right? People talk about Wagner all the time, or Strauss or whatever. And we'll definitely get to that. But yeah, the whole thing just, man, it's quick for me to feel like I'm rambling here, but it just, I get in my feelings about it, Scott. I really
understand.
do. There's I'm gonna shout out my mom. She is big into ancestry and maintaining the family tree and all of that. And there's a photo. If I haven't shown it to you, I'll show it to you, and maybe I'll have it posted for this episode of Trilloquy. There's a photo of my great grandmother, who I knew, as a child, standing with her parents and her grandmother in front of this house. and that was the plantation where they worked in North Alabama, I believe. And the story is that the owner of the farm, the slave owner, was sleeping with my, I guess that would be my great grandmother's grandmother. Her name was America, and the wife got mad and left, and the slave owner went to follow her, to chase her. So in the process, he sold the farm to the farm's foreman, as long as he married America. So that's kind of, where my, you know, lineage starts for all intents and purposes, because there's no way for us to know what happened before that. They didn't care. They treated slaves like cattle. There weren't family records and all that sort of thing. One of the hard things people don't talk about all the time is that they were making mother and son, brother and sister sleep together, because you're breeding workers, you're breeding cattle. So that's damn, like, that's my family history, and that's something that I have to think about all the time. And again, getting back to the topic of Juneteenth, that's why it's so important for me to make sure this day is acknowledged, because while we are still not free as a people, completely and wholly, in my opinion, that day did something. That day did something that continues to reverberate around the world. Whew, I might need a breather. What you got to talk about?
You sent me a lot of things to look at so that I would be better prepared to talk today.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of realizations just sitting there on the floor. It was maybe 3 years ago. I was in a program here at work called Emerging Leaders. Mm-hmm. One day we went over to Lutheran Social Services to do an exercise, and we talked with some people who were from Somalia, from Ethiopia, from various African countries that now work for Lutheran Social Services after being helped to get to the United States through their work, through mm-hmm. Lutheran Social Services work. And we had an exercise to do. Half of us were put over into this area where they put together boxes for the food pantry. And the rest of us went to the grocery store to get groceries. And we were given a list. It had to be on the WIC program. And it was everything awkward or heavy to carry. I'm talking like a bag of rice, gallons of juice or milk, eggs. Okay, so you understand that mm-hmm. not all of these go into a bag and are easy to handle.
Right.
And it was kind of cold, kind of spitting rain as we're walking over there. And after about 20 or 25 minutes of walking, I remember thinking, how far are we going to go? And there was all of a sudden like a little knock in the back of my head. And then we were in a store that most people would walk by because it was unsigned. The front door was propped open with a rock. And inside was some groceries, just haphazardly put up on a shelf. Mm-hmm. Not everything on our list was there. And that means for a family that is getting WIC assistance, if they didn't have eggs that day, you don't get eggs.
Yeah.
We were also, there was no room to get a shopping cart through there. So you either had to bring your own items, your own boxes or bags or whatever it was. And it was as we were putting these things together, my partner, who also happened to, Pam Belknap, shout out to Pam Belknap, who led these things. She looked over at me and she says, can you imagine having 2 or 3 little kids and try to put all this together? And I immediately thought, I can't.
And then doing it by yourself.
Yeah.
You don't have a partner to help you.
And you're trying to keep some kids in line.
Right. And you got to go to work too.
Yep. And then then there's a little louder knock, and then we're at the cash register ready to check out, and there was some little parcel, something candy like in a bag hanging there, and I remember going, oh, this looks interesting, and the woman from that was with us from Lutheran Social Services said, is that on your list? And there's another knock. And on the way home, I'm thinking, man, we're carrying all this stuff and traffic is going by like a yard away.
Yeah.
And we get back to lunch and I couldn't even eat. Each one of those knocks was a realization. And it really resonated because in that person I imagined, I saw people in my neighborhood that are going through the same thing. And that someone who looks like me might say or do something out of ignorance that...
Yeah, yeah. And, you know...
Help!
Yeah,
get me out of this, Garrett.
No, and... It just speaks to, you know, God, it speaks to the hatred of blackness, you know, and those Somali refugees, as much as they have to go through, imagine being brought here against your will and told to fight and told to reproduce offspring with your mother or your sister to help somebody else make more money. And then we're supposed to forget about that. You know, that is a reality that someone that I knew alive, you know, my great grandmother, I remember, she passed away maybe when I was 5 or 6, but, you know, it's very, very much in my memory, you know, taking walks around the block with her and, you know, just her being a part of my life. She lived inside of that reality. My grandmother, who is very much alive, my mom's mom, you know, was a sharecropper, which, you know, was for all intents and purposes a step away from slavery. It's not like they were actually making the money that they deserve picking that cotton day in and day out, you know. Mm-hmm. So and that sort of thing manifests. You know, at your house, Scott, we talked about you know, life being about balance, you know, having some things and not having other things. I know
contentment.
You toil a lot about not having romantic love in your life, because you don't not have love in your life. You don't have romantic love in your life. But you know, there are other things you do have. You have a beautiful home. You have a great setup and all that sort of thing. And, you know, the issues with the personal debt that I have from student loans and otherwise, you know, how my credit is just really a mess, you know, it ties back into that. You know, how can the grandson of a sharecropper, the grandson of someone who picked cotton and wasn't paid what she deserves, you know, sometimes I feel like I have already done phenomenal things considering that short amount of time, you know, but there are going to be connections that keep me behind. And I'm not trying to blame, you know, some of the decisions I had to make on where I came from as much as I mean to say, you know, we just don't acknowledge often enough the connection that we all have to that history in one way or another. And you know, I feel like we should tie it a little bit to music since this is you know, fringes of classical music. So on our playlists, and I would air them all the time in Knoxville and air them a lot here in Minnesota, you know, the Negro spirituals. And first of all, I know that word Negro is not a word that a lot of people feel comfortable saying or even hearing. But I categorize that music that way because that's what it was called. So and maybe we can hear a clip of one or something, put it in here. But you know, this music, you know, they were originally songs that were like how can I say, secret messages to help people, you know, find that freedom back in the days of slavery. So one I'm thinking about right now is called Follow the Drinking Gourd. And I remember I first learned this song in elementary school. You know, see, I had teachers who cared about this history, you know. Do you know that song, Follow the Drinking Gourd?
I don't.
So basically, you know, in the fields, you would just sing sing that song, and it would get passed along. And, the more you sing this simple melody, it gets passed along down the fields and through the different workhouses or whatever, so that when people are ready to run from the plantation, they know to do what? Follow the drinking gourd, which for
Okay.
us is, I guess, the Big Dipper or the Little Dipper or whatever, just running north.
Oh, okay.
What I would say is the most famous Negro spiritual is Wade in the Water. So, how about we hear a little bit of that now?
In the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. Everybody wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna
Wow, and credits, the credits we have there. Shout out the LSU vocal ensemble. So bravo to them for that. What is that song? So just listening to that song or that phrase, "wade in the water." What would you think that means?
I was about to ask you the same thing. I have a connection to a lot of Americana,
Mm-hmm.
and down to the river to pray, and I'm weary, let me rest. Things like that. Even though I'm not really a religious person,
Mm-hmm.
those make me feel very down on my knees, hand in the air.
And that's what's so brilliant about that genre. Excuse me. What's so brilliant about that subgenre of classical music? I'm getting choked up. Because for it to be sung out in the open like that, it had to have a purpose that the overseers and the slave masters could not see. So maybe on the surface, there is a story about in the Bible about wading in the water. Jesus cures a man's leprosy by dipping him in the river. You can
Yeah.
also, you can also make ties to baptism and all that sort of thing. But when you're on the run, it was harder for the dogs to catch you
Throwing the scent off. That makes sense.
if you waded in the water. Whew, just thinking about it, goodness gracious. So anyway, that's why music like that is so important, because it's a part of what is American classical music. You like Dvorak. Dvorak said himself that there is no classical music. There could be no classical music in America
Yeah.
without the incorporation of Negro melodies. Is the phrase he used.
And spirituals.
And spirituals, and that's why Negro spirituals are so important and should not even be the fringe of classical music. That should be part of the core of the repertoire.
I'm almost afraid to ask this question because Frederick Delius worked in an orange grove in Florida.
And we say orange grove to be very polite, but
It was a plantation.
it was an orange plantation. And I'm going to tell you, Scott, the story of Frederick Delius is one that I used to really love because I consider myself a little disobedient. So, when his
You?
so
No.
like to shake the table a little bit. So when when Delius's parents sent him from England to Florida, to run that orange plantation, he was gonna write music. That was his time away from home to
Oh,
focus
yeah.
on writing his music. But not only was he here to run an orange plantation, he fathered an illegitimate child. At least the writings are that. So somebody, again, like I say, the fact checkers are going to get me, but I have definitely read from multiple sources that he fathered an illegitimate child down there. Who is that child? Who is that woman? The mother. What is their story? Who knows? Because they're just the workers, and I'm glad you brought that up because it speaks to how, again, you cannot separate any part of our history, including classical music, from that dark part of that dark reality for America. Again, off mic, I just did a quick Google search looking for more connections between classical music and American slavery. And the first link that popped up was, the headline is "A Revealing Look at Handel's Investment in the Slave Trade." I'm going to read that article later. But I mean, it makes sense. It doesn't seem immediately just far-fetched to think that someone would make an investment in this booming slave trade, but back in the 19th century, and just as we all have a connection to it, maybe in a not so flattering way, in a horrible way. The way I have to think about my family lineage and my family background. There are also a lot of folks out there still benefiting from that history, and these are corporations. I mean, did you know that there are major corporations that exist still today that had money in the cotton business? Way back when, which in turn was money in the slave trade.
There's like 8 or 10 banks that are still operating today, right?
Yes, and that includes. I mean, should we just go ahead? I don't know.
People have the internet. Let's focus on the connection to music and
Okay, but don't forget to look it up, because I think it's important to really understand that connection and what it means for these corporations to still exist. So let's talk about the other side of it, Scott. So just in the way that those Negro spirituals really, sing back that history, there's music on the other side. The song Dixie is one that you just know if you grew up in the South. The Ole Miss, is it the University of Mississippi? We call the school Ole Miss, the school in Oxford, Mississippi. For many years, we going to the University of Memphis, they were one of the schools we played in football and basketball. Their marching band plays Dixie out on that field. I don't know if this is the case anymore, but when I was in school, their mascot was Colonel Reb. How am I supposed how am I supposed to feel about that? Or how is a black student supposed to feel about going to a school and being in the band? And they not only do they have to play Dixie, but they have to play Dixie for this mascot called Colonel Reb. And then when they leave the football stadium, they have to see all of these trucks with these Confederate flags flying over them under the guise of heritage, not hate. It's crazy to me. It's nuts to me. It's nuts to me that people validate it.
You remember when we were talking about soup versus salad when it comes to music,
Sure.
How some music is a soup and others a salad because you can point out individual ingredients?
Yeah.
What you just described, for me, is such a soup I cannot comprehend.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's a reality. It's a very real soup.
Okay, so how do I show that I'm making the effort? How do I try to help fix that?
Well, I mean,
Is there something I can even do in my shift? Is there something I can do when I'm on the air to point these things out? I don't. This is what I'm saying. Where you probably have allies that don't know where to begin.
yeah. Well, so two things. You asked about on the air. So whenever there is a composer or a performer, if there's anything black about anything I air, I make that the centerpiece because that's how I show equity toward the black diaspora as it applies to classical music. So I understand that race doesn't always have an immediate role in the classical music. Not even the classical music by black composers or black musicians. It makes perfect sense. If you remember back to the interview I did with Katie and Delaney, we talked about the idea of like this all black orchestra at the Gateways Festival playing Rachmaninoff. So that wasn't immediately an ode to black classical music because, it's music by Rachmaninoff, but it's still significant that considering our history, we have all still managed to do this. It's so important, I think, to do that, in your radio shifts or whatever.
Okay, that's a good start point.
But the other part of that is, I think the more immediate answer is to deal with it in your periphery, and that's how all of this stuff gets passed down generationally. I feel like I'm going to say this, crucify me if you want. I feel like every or nearly every white person knows someone, has a family member, has someone in the circle who doesn't always say the the right thing, or doesn't always think in the
Oh,
quite right
yes.
way. Okay. And maybe it's not race. Maybe it has to do with gender, or maybe, they
Orientation.
orientate, yeah, sexual, whatever. The work is to deal with where you see it. And so many people want to go out into the world and with their picket signs and do this and that, and they're one of the allies. But how are you an ally when your father still uses the N-word, or your brother's kids are being taught that there's nothing wrong with the Confederate flag, or whatever. That's the work, and that's where it exists, and that's where it has to be done. But anyway,
William Grant Still, that spiritual that you played, William Grant Still used that in one of his quartets, right?
yeah, and in a lot of his music, you'll hear those spirituals. In the opening solo, the opening English horn solo in his Afro-American symphony is one of those spirituals. Maybe let's hear that, just that opening solo. So yeah, definitely go listen to the rest of that really incredible work. That was the Chicago Sinfonietta under the baton of Paul Freeman, who is an Afro American conductor. Um, and there's so much. We need to wrap up here soon. We've done a lot of gabbing, but just as an aside, I would like to say that there's so much happening in Chicago, even when it comes to revitalizing these Negro spirituals, this Black classical music. Florence Price, that's where she hit it big in Chicago. Where did our first Black president come from? There's a lot of history there. So shout out to Chicago and all the incredible work that's being done there. So, you know, while this conversation, Scott, wasn't immediately tied to classical music, there are connections.
I didn't know that we were going to go there, but I'm glad that we ended up where we went.
Yeah.
Let's talk about some of the connections. Can we talk about the positive connections?
Yeah. So I mean, next time, maybe even if you want to prepare for next Juneteenth, even think about Negro spirituals. Think about the connection that every Black American has to the institution of slavery. Think about every connection white Americans have to the institution of slavery, and what that means for our future, and how we can apply that to our different worlds and our different fields. For us, it's classical music, and there are definitely really important ties there. So,
what about ensembles? What ensembles would you recommend people start checking out?
The American Spiritual Ensemble down in Kentucky, I think Lexington, Kentucky, is very active. They keep up with all of that history and all of those performances. I mentioned Chicago. In Chicago, there is the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians. They deal a lot with music that has ties to Afro-America and the African diaspora. And beyond that, just listen to the music of Black composers. We talk about Florence Price and William Grant Still all the time.
I love William Grant Still's work.
Revisit the symphonic works of Duke Ellington. Go back and listen to a rag by Scott Joplin. Find a living Black composer to listen to. There's Jesse Montgomery out of New York, really making big waves. I interviewed a guy named Tyshawn Sorey earlier this orchestra season, so I guess maybe in October or November or something. But it's out there. The stories are out there, and as much as I love unearthing them, all of the onus, doesn't fall on me, or even organizations like American Public Media. Go find this music, go celebrate this music, and go share these stories, so that maybe one day we can all be free, because we're not there yet. But I hope one day we can be.
You talk about the Sphinx Conference a lot, and
I'm wearing a Sphinx hoodie now.
yeah, and many of your guests also reference that. What is their outlet for recordings? Is that the Sphinx Virtuosi?
Yeah, the Sphinx Virtuosi Ensemble. Now, Sphinx is an organization for Black and Latinx musicians. So it's not exclusively
Okay.
Black, but
Okay.
but definitely, a very, very important organization to become familiar with. The Gateways Festival has already come up a few times on this podcast. The executive director of that is a man named Lee Koonce, Koonce. That's based in Rochester, New York. Definitely look up and become familiar with the Gateways Festival, a very important bastion of the celebration of members of the Black diaspora, the African diaspora, as we apply to classical music and how we come together and maintain that tradition. So, and that's just the beginning. It's all out there, and hopefully we'll be able to showcase more of those in the future. So next time on Trilloquy, you'll get to hear my conversation with Jonathan Gibbs, and this is another one of those interesting conversations that ties into like the history of oppression in this country. So Jonathan is multiracial. He's Black and Asian. His mom is from the Philippines, and he's also on the queer spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
So we talk about his relationship with a group he sings with, the New York City Gay Men's Chorus, and how an ensemble that is categorized as a gay men's chorus is no longer completely inclusive. It's a really interesting conversation, so I can't wait for y'all to hear that.
I can't wait. It's Jonathan Gibbs next time on Trilloquy.